In the cold void between stars, where light from distant suns takes millennia to reach the scattered worlds of humanity, there exists a war that most will never know. It is a war fought in shadow, in silence, in places where reality itself grows thin and the nightmares of the universe press against the fragile membrane that separates the material realm from something far worse. It is a war without end, without glory, without recognition. And it is fought by warriors whose very existence remains unknown to the billions they protect. They are called the Grey Knights, sons of Titan, the Daemon Hunters. Their fortress monastery rests upon Titan, the largest moon of Saturn, shrouded in perpetual mystery and shielded from the sight of those who would seek to learn their secrets. Here, in halls of cold grey stone and silver-traced metal, these warriors prepare for battles that would shatter the minds of ordinary men. They are space marines, yes, enhanced beyond normal human limitations through the gene seed of the Emperor himself. But they are more than that. Each Grey Knight carries within him a psychic gift, honed and tempered through decades of training, forged into a weapon as deadly as the Nemesis force weapons they bear into battle. Their armor gleams silver, inscribed with wards and sigils of protection, each symbol painstakingly etched by hands that understand the precise mathematics of faith. Their halberds and swords shimmer with contained power, their edges existing partly in the material realm and partly in that other place, the warp, where the entities they hunt make their home. Every aspect of a Grey Knight's existence is dedicated to a single purpose: the destruction of daemonkind. Let us speak, then, of what it means to be such a warrior. Let us follow one of these grey suns into the darkness and witness the price that must be paid. The ship Crucible drifted through the void like a dying leviathan. From the outside, it appeared as a crenulated slab of dulled metal, an imperial cargo vessel of unremarkable design. But something had gone terribly wrong in the Crucible's passage through the warp. The space around the vessel still bore bruises from its panicked attempt to return to safety, ripples in reality where the ship had torn its way back into the material universe. That desperate hope had been false. The Crucible was doomed, its fate sealed by forces beyond the understanding of its crew. A rift was forming in the ship's heart, a wound in reality itself, gorging on existence, swelling with every passing moment. Through that wound, something was preparing to be born. The ship that came to answer this threat was called the Blade's Peace, a vessel small and swift, crewed by those who served the Grey Knights in silent devotion. It could have carried a handful of warriors, but only one was aboard. He stood vigil in the candle-filled armory during the 2 nights of travel through the warp, surrounded by chapter serfs in red and white robes with mirror-covered eyes, by tech priests who clicked and muttered in machine cant over every wire and fastening. His name was Istafel, brother of the 7th Brotherhood, son of Titan. In those silent hours, the serfs disassembled his war gear down to the smallest rivet. Istafel held each component, feeling the traces of its past in every touch. He saw memories flash through his mind like lightning illuminating a darkened landscape. The fires of Lucara dancing against a black sky. The death of the Revelator of Velt, in the heartbeat before a daemon, took his sight. The cold air of Hynel thick with the ozone of teleportation. 1,000 fragments caught like threads on the thorns of time. These moments were his life, the marks he had made by the passage of his existence. Eventually, he knew, they would be forgotten. He had no memory of a life before becoming a son of Titan. A child had been born somewhere, had grown and lived, but that boy was not him. That boy was a ghost who had died long ago, his very name erased by the transformation into something greater, something necessary. When the captain informed him of their arrival, Istafel's armor had been rebuilt 3 times over. The serfs clad his flesh with its second skin, and his helmet closed over his head, filling his eyes with a web of projected data. He became a hunched figure of silvered plate, with 777 purity seals hanging from his form like dry leaves, rustling as he moved to take his halberd from its iron coffer. He did not go to the bridge. Instead, he walked the kilometre-long passages to the launch bay, watching the Crucible grow larger in his helmet display. The captain's name was Lydia. She had served the Grey Knights for almost a century, carrying many warriors to battles that would see them dead. Istafel wondered if she realized that she was his ferryman to the underworld. The boarding torpedo waited for him, lying in its cradle like a dissected bullet. As he climbed into its cramped confines and felt his armor lock into place, Istafel allowed himself one moment of regret. He would have liked to speak to his brothers one final time. Then the torpedo launched, hurling him toward the dying ship, toward the darkness that awaited within. What Istafel found aboard the Crucible was no longer a ship in any meaningful sense. The physical structure remained, yes, corridors and chambers and bulkheads, but reality had grown thin here. The warp pressed in from all sides, reshaping what his eyes perceived into metaphor, into symbol, into something his mind could comprehend without shattering. He closed his mundane sight and opened the eyes of his soul. The ship became a winter forest. Grey trees hunched and leafless surrounded him, their branches stroking a rising fog. The trunks swayed like shadows thrown by a guttering lamp. A wet iron smell filled his mouth and nose. None of this was real, not in any sense that a sane mind would recognize. But in the realm of the warp, metaphor was truth and perception shaped reality. Beyond the trees, he could glimpse the rift point as a cave-like darkness. It was growing, ripping wider with every moment. Something waited within that blackness, building strength to birth itself into the material world. A demon of the highest order, an entity of immense power that had waited eons for this chance to manifest. Istafel kindled an image of flame in his mind, holding it until the pattern formed completely. His armor began to glow, fire rising from the silvered plates. A sphere of light walked with him now, and the shadows of the forest recoiled from its touch. Beneath his feet, snow that had not existed when he began his step melted into rivulets of rust and oil. The forest twisted around him as he advanced. Corridors of tree trunks and bent branches formed and vanished. The ground rose and fell like ocean waves. Eyes watched him from the darkness between the trees, glittering with moonlight cold, and shapes moved on the edge of sight, slithering and padding through the supernatural landscape. They came for him. The lesser daemons that swarmed in the wake of greater powers, drawn by his light like moths to flame. They had bodies like hounds, mouths that opened in their snouts like cracks splitting fire-blackened clay. Their hate and hunger snarled across his thoughts as they bounded forward. Istafel dropped into a crouch and drove his halberd forward. The blade punched into the first daemon's neck, and he twisted, flipping the creature over his head as its body dissolved into ash and frost. Then more came, pouring from the darkness in shapes that millennia of nightmare had given them. Skinless bodies of blood-slick sinew, spheres of reaching hands, horned heads that grinned with iron fangs. He fought them with blade and bolt, with fire called from his soul, cutting through the tide of corrupted flesh. Blood sprayed in the wind, lifting into the fog in spreading pink stains. The snow beneath his feet turned to slush, then to standing water that reflected nothing. But these were merely obstacles, tests. The true enemy waited deeper within. Far across the galaxy, on a world called Margentum, another battle raged. Captain Daniel Prestoff of the Brinderweald 9th Division had never believed in angels. He was a practical man, a product of his world's pragmatic culture, raised to believe in what he could see and touch and verify with his own senses. But when the stars began to fall toward the battlefield where his regiment was making its last stand, he found himself weeping tears of something he could only call faith. The Brinderweald had landed on Margentum with 20,000 soldiers, confident in their mission to suppress a heretical rebellion. They had marched forward singing hymns, their painted shields held high, the drums and fifes playing martial airs as they advanced on the last enemy city. They had been so certain of victory. Then the gates had opened, and things had poured out. Not rebels, not soldiers, things that defied description, creatures that seemed to exist in mockery of natural form. They emerged from the bodies of Prestoff's own men, tearing their way out of human flesh in showers of blood and screaming. The rebellion on Margentum had been merely a mask for something far worse, a demonic incursion. The Brindelwald had broken and run, their pride shattered, their numbers decimated. For days they had retreated across the blighted landscape, harried at every step by creatures that laughed with human voices and killed with inhuman glee. By the time they reached the landing site and dug in for a last stand, fewer than 10,000 remained. Prestoff had accepted death. Standing on the makeshift walls of their encampment, watching the enemy horde gather in numbers beyond counting, he had made peace with the end. His only regret was that he would not see his wife and daughters again until they stood together before the golden throne. And then the stars fell. They streaked down from the heavens, blazing with light. Prestoff shielded his eyes as they struck the enemy lines, and when he could see again, giants strode among the daemons. They were armored in silver, their halberds flashing, their bolters roaring. Where they walked, the enemy died. Where they stood, the tide of corruption broke and receded. The creatures that had slaughtered his regiment by the thousands fled screaming from these warriors, or were cut down where they stood. The Brindlewield soldiers wept with joy. They called these warriors angels, saints descended from the heavens to answer their prayers, and perhaps, in a way, they were. One of them, a giant in silver who identified himself as Brother Macon, took charge of the surviving Imperial forces. His voice carried absolute certainty, each word spoken as though the outcome was already determined. When he said they would win this war, Prestoff believed him with every fibre of his being. They advanced alongside the Silver Saints, retaking ground that had been lost, pushing the enemy back toward their corrupted city. The horror and despair that had gripped Prestoff's heart lifted like fog before the morning sun. He watched Brother Macon stride through enemy fire without flinching, watched the giant's halberd rise and fall with mechanical precision, and he understood what it meant to have faith. They called them the Silver Saints, these warriors who had appeared from nowhere to save them. The Brindlewield soldiers did not know their true name. They did not know the terrible secret that these silver-armored giants carried with them. They did not know that witnessing their existence was a crime punishable by death. In the heart of the crucible, Istafel faced his enemy at last. The daemon pulled itself from the rift like a great serpent coiling from a cave. Ectoplasmic birth fluid sheened its hunched body. Muscles twitched beneath translucent skin as it took form, quills sprouting and unfurling into pale feathers that colored like an oil slick. Its limbs lengthened, sprouting delicate white claws. When its eyelids cracked open, they revealed twin holes into a fire that burned beyond the boundaries of mortal understanding. This was no minor entity, no beast of the lower orders. This was a daemon of the highest choir, an intelligence that had existed since before humanity first looked up at the stars and wondered. It had names in languages that predated speech, and in the hierarchy of the warp, it commanded legions. Istafel struck first, sending his mind forward in a whip of lightning. The fog around him flashed white as psychic power arced toward the newly manifested creature. The daemon stumbled, still aligning its powers to existence in the physical world. For this instant, Istafel held an advantage. He pressed it ruthlessly. Another surge of power, forked lightning that coiled around the daemon and tightened. His mind bit into its essence, dug deep, breathed pain into its core. The creature screamed and thrashed, scattering black blood across the snow. Istafel moved closer, the tip of his halberd pointing at its twitching form. Perhaps, he thought, the prognosticators had been wrong. Perhaps he would not end here after all. Then the daemon vanished. His halberd sliced into empty ground, throwing up sparks of molten metal. The cage of lightning guttered out around nothing. Istafel understood, in that moment, how completely he had been deceived. The creature he had fought was an illusion, a decoy. The true daemon had been there all along, watching, waiting, letting him exhaust himself against a phantom while it gathered strength. Laughter rolled through the forest on the wind. The daemon stepped from the shadows, and looking at it felt like falling. It loomed taller and taller, a shape of living darkness with features picked out by an inner furnace glow. A talon-tipped hand solidified in the instant before it thrust at his gut. They fought, blade against claw, will against will. Istafel's halberd carved lines of silver light through the darkness, while the daemon's talons gouged molten tracks across his armor. The forest around them dissolved, the metaphor collapsing into raw unreality. He felt the cold light of oblivion pressing in as the ship's death throes accelerated around them. A blow caught him across the temple, shattering his eyepiece. Another struck his chest, and he felt one of his hearts rupture. The daemon was on him now, worrying at him like a carrion bird, its flesh burning from contact with his blessed silver, even as it tore him apart. In the darkness that followed, when his physical sight had failed and only his soul's eye remained, the daemon spoke to him. "Why did you come here?" Its voice was made of razors, each word opening wounds in his psyche. "It is my purpose," Istafel answered, hardening his will like stone against the assault. "To die. Yes." The daemon considered this. When it spoke again, there was no mockery in its tone, only a strange, terrible honesty. You are a remarkable soul, you and all your kind. You are the Imperium's sacrifice, its sons offered up in hope of survival. You die for an empire that will never know that you lived. You do not push back the darkness, nor bring a new dawn. You fight a war that you can never win, only prolong. The pressure of its power built around Istafel's mind, crushing inward from all directions. I am glad we had this time, the daemon said, but you will die here. I know, Istafel replied. I have always known. He spoke his name, not the name he had been given, not the designation he carried, but his true name, the one that had been forged in opposition to this very creature. The daemon screamed, recoiling as the syllables cut into its essence like a blade. I name myself, Istafel said through lips that bled with each word. Istafel, son of Titan, knight of the seventh brotherhood. He felt ice spreading through his soul, consuming him from within. I name myself, and I name you. The daemon's true name came from his throat in a flow of syllables that felt like dying. Each sound cost him something vital, something that would never return. But he spoke them all, binding himself to the creature, linking their fates in chains that could not be broken. I name us and bind us together, blood and soul and fate. The daemon tried to pull away, but it was too late. They were one now, locked together in a death grip that transcended the physical. Istafel embraced his enemy and let the fire take them both. On Margentum, the battle was won. The daemons had been driven back, their corrupted city cleansed by the silver saints who walked with the Grindark survivors. Captain Prestoff stood in the ruins of the last enemy stronghold, surrounded by the remains of his regiment, and wept with relief. They had survived. Against all odds, against enemies beyond imagining, they had survived. Brother Macon stood apart from the celebrating soldiers, his silver armor splashed with ichor that evaporated as Prestoff watched. The giant's expression was unreadable behind his helm, but something in his posture spoke of sorrow rather than triumph. Prestoff approached him, still buoyed by the euphoria of victory. "We're finished here," he said. "Thank the God Emperor, we're finished." The silver saint looked down at him, and there was infinite sadness in the eyes behind the helm. "Not quite," he said softly. Behind Prestoff, power weapons hummed to life. Stormtroopers in black armor raised their hellguns. The surviving Grindark soldiers, still laughing and embracing, did not notice until it was too late. In that moment, Prestoff understood. The secret of the Silver Saints was not meant to be known. The daemon hunters could not allow word of their existence to spread. Every witness, every survivor who had seen them fight, every soul who could speak of silver-armored angels descending from the sky, all of them were liabilities. All of them had to die. "I'm sorry," Brother Macon said, and Prestoff believed him. "This is the burden we carry, the price of the war we fight." The bolters spoke, and the Grindark 9th Division died. Far away, on the moon called Titan, 3 minds gathered in communion. They did not meet in body. They had no need of such crude interaction. Instead, they merged their thoughts, becoming for a time a single consciousness that processed information faster than any physical conversation could allow. A grandmaster, a brother captain, and a prognosticator sharing the burden of decision. "It is done," one voice said. "We will remember him," answered another. A pool of silence filled the communion. When the voices returned, they spoke as one. "He was our brother, and so we name him." They began the ritual thought pattern, rolling Istafel's memory between them until it became like a stone smoothed by the sea. They held the thought until it was hard and clear, ready to be remembered. A part of their consciousness that never slept added his name to a murmured list that had existed for 10,000 years. Istafel, Istafel, Istafel. Somewhere beyond time and hope, the fallen brother heard them. This is the way of the Grey Knights. This is the price they pay. They are born in secrecy and die in shadow. Their victories are unsung, their sacrifices unremembered by all but their brothers. The Imperium they protect will never know their names, will never raise monuments to their fallen, will never speak words of gratitude for the nightmares they have banished. They fight a war without end, against enemies that cannot truly be killed, only banished for a time. Every victory is temporary. Every daemon slain will eventually reform in the warp, gathering strength for a return that might come in centuries or millennia. The Grey Knights know this. They fight anyway. They die so that others might live in ignorance of the horrors that lurk at the edges of reality. They sacrifice not only their lives but their very memory, their place in history, their right to be mourned. When a Grey Knight falls, only his brothers know. Only they light candles in the cold halls of Titan and speak the names of the dead. It is a lonely existence. It is a necessary one. In the void between stars, the war continues. In the places where reality grows thin, silver-armored warriors stand against the darkness. They do not expect thanks. They do not seek glory. They simply endure and fight and die, so that humanity might survive another day. They are the Daemon Hunters, the Sons of Titan, the Grey Knights. And somewhere, in the howling depths of the warp, the daemons they have banished wait for their chance to return. The war is eternal, the sacrifice is constant, and the Grey Knights remain, vigilant in the darkness, until the end of all things. Let their names be remembered, if only by those who share their burden. Let their deeds be honored, if only in the quiet halls where candles burn for the fallen. Let their sacrifice be acknowledged, if only in the hearts of those who understand what it costs to keep humanity safe from the things that lurk in nightmare. They are the hammer, they are the shield, they are the mail about the Emperor's fist. They are the Grey Knights, and they shall know no fear. But let us speak of another battle, another sacrifice, another group of grey suns walking into darkness. The Grand Cruiser Merciless had once been a proud vessel of the Imperial Navy, her corridors walked by thousands of loyal servants of the Emperor. She had carried armies across the stars, her guns had spoken death to the enemies of mankind, her name had been honored in the annals of fleet command. Now she drifted through the void like a plague ship, her crew twisted beyond recognition, her decks crawling with things that had once been human. A sorcerer named Bulger Herc had taken the vessel. In the month since his capture of the Merciless, he had transformed it into something that defied sanity. The crew had been cut apart and reassembled, their bodies rearranged into configurations that mocked the human form. Torsos became anchors for random splays of limbs. Multiple heads were mounted on single sets of shoulders, their jaws replaced with sharpened bone. Things that had once been men now skittered along ceilings on dozens of hands, or slithered through corridors as serpents of fused flesh. Herc had done this for his own amusement. He had somewhere to be, and he needed a ship to get there. The suffering of the crew was merely entertainment for the journey. 4 Grey Knights came to stop him. They arrived by teleportation, hurled across hundreds of kilometers of void in an instant, their bodies passing through the warp and emerging in the lower engineering decks of the corrupted vessel. The technology that made such travel possible was ancient beyond measure, irreplaceable and imperfect. Men had been lost to teleportation, turned inside out or merged with the walls upon re-entry. But these warriors knew the risks and accepted them. Justicar Alaric was their leader. He had fought daemons across a dozen worlds, had seen horrors that would break lesser men, had buried brothers and carried on. With him came Devaughn, strongest of the squad, wielding a nemesis hammer that had crushed the skulls of 100 abominations. Holvarn followed, Alaric's second, his faith burning so bright it seemed almost visible. And young Visical, the newest among them, still learning the weight of the burden they all carried. The disorientation of teleportation faded quickly. These were warriors trained to fight in any condition, to recover from any shock. Within moments they were on their feet, weapons ready, assessing their surroundings. The familiar architecture of an Imperial warship surrounded them. Aquilae worked into vaulted ceilings, prayer algorithms stamped into ironwork floors by Mechanicus shipwrights. The air carried the peculiar smell of spacecraft oil and sweat, incense from tech rituals, propellant from ships' guns. But beneath it all lay something else, something wrong. A monstrous howl echoed from deeper in the vessel. "First priority is survival," said Devaughn, hefting his hammer. "Where is your faith, brother?" Holvarn replied with a reproachful smile. "Faith is the shield that never falters. Bear it up, brothers. Bear it up." Visical's voice joined theirs, shaking slightly but growing stronger with each word. The litanies they had learned on Titan, the prayers that armored their souls against corruption, spilled from their lips in a rising chant. "I am the hammer. I am the shield. I am the mail about his fist. I am the point of his spear." They came then. The things that had once been crew. Asymmetrical bodies lurched from the darkness, limbs moving in impossible configurations, stretched naval uniforms wrapped around tangles of bone and sinew that bore no resemblance to human anatomy. Alaric saw the stitches and sutures where flesh had been cut apart and rearranged by hands that cared nothing for the screams of the victims. The Grey Knights opened fire. Storm bolters roared, each shell a miniature rocket that punched through corrupted flesh and detonated within. Visical's incinerator spewed blessed fire, and the mutant crewmen burned like torches as they charged. The corridor became an abattoir, walls splashed with blood and scattered limbs. But they kept coming. Carried forward on the bodies of its lesser kin came something larger. Torsos stacked atop one another, sewn together at shoulder and abdomen, formed a serpentine body that filled the corridor. Its head was composed of severed hands, fastened together with wire into the approximation of a bestial skull. Its teeth were sharpened ribs. Its eyes were beating hearts still pumping in their sockets. It moved faster than even Alaric could react. Suddenly it was over him, mouth yawning wide, revealing thousands of teeth implanted in its fleshy gullet. Alaric drove his shoulder upward into the thing's jaw, ramming his fist into the meat of its neck. His storm bolter found something vital, brain or heart. It didn't matter, and fired. The creature came apart around him in a shower of gore. They fought their way deeper into the ship, through corridors that twisted and pulsed like living things, past chambers where the walls wept blood and whispered blasphemies. The air grew thick with wrongness, with the psychic pressure of the warp pressing in from all sides, and then they found Herc. The astronave dome of the Merciless had shattered, its transparent surface now a field of broken shards that littered the deck. Through the breach, instead of the expected hard vacuum, a vortex of power churned, a glimpse through the veil into the warp itself. A man without the mental training of a Grey Knight would have been transfixed by that sight, condemned to stare until his body failed or his soul was drawn through into the realm of daemons. Herc floated at the center of the dome, suspended by forces that defied physics. He had once been a man, but now he resembled a primitive god, something worshipped by savages on distant worlds. 6 arms spread wide in gestures of benediction. Instead of legs, long plumes of iridescent feathers trailed beneath him, crawling with imp-like familiars that cackled and leered. His face remained human, but the eyes had migrated to his bare chest, 2 great yellow orbs that stared unblinking at the Grey Knights. Sacred implements orbited around him, chains brass-plated skulls, daggers, a lash of purple sinew, each dripping with silvery filaments of power. "Brother," Herc said, and the lipless mouths that had grown in his palms spoke in unison with his true voice. "Grey Knight, son of the Emperor, child of the universe, thank you. Thank you for being my witness. My glory is nothing without the greatest of men to behold it." "I spit on your glory," Alaric shouted back, his voice nearly lost in the screaming wind that filled the dome. Daemons poured from the vortex above, eel-like creatures that left contrails of spinning knives as they swooped down toward the Grey Knights. Pulses of golden fire rained from Herc's extended hands, each one a miniature comet that exploded against blessed silver armor. The battle that followed was chaos and fury. Devorn's hammer rose and fell, crushing daemon flesh with each swing. Holvan's blade carved arcs of silver light through the air. Visical's incinerator scoured the deck, burning away the lesser creatures that swarmed around them. And Alaric, always Alaric at the forefront, pushed forward toward the floating sorcerer. Herc laughed as he fought, reveling in the destruction, drawing power from the vortex above him. Visions from his depraved life churned in the air around him, 1,000,000 bodies burning in golden flame, entire cities weeping tears that rose up to drown them, libraries of forbidden knowledge tearing themselves apart in celebration of his passing. But the Grey Knights were implacable. They had faced worse. They had always faced worse. Alaric reached Herc as the sorcerer's concentration wavered. One moment of weakness, one instant of distraction, and the Justicar's blade found its mark. The force weapon bit deep into twisted flesh, and the power it channeled, power drawn from Alaric's own psychically attuned mind, disrupted the flows of warp energy that sustained the sorcerer. Herc screamed. The vortex above him shuddered and began to collapse. The daemons that had poured through shrieked as their connection to the warp was severed, their forms dissolving into nothing. The sorcerer fell, his spine severed by Alaric's final strike, his body paralyzed but still alive. The Grey Knights needed him alive. They needed to know what he knew, where he had been going, what greater threat he served. That knowledge would be extracted later, in the interrogation chambers aboard the Inquisition vessel Obsidian Sky. An interrogator named Thorn would break what remained of Herc's mind, peeling away his secrets layer by layer until nothing remained but the truth. The price of that truth would be paid in suffering. The suffering of the interrogated, yes, but also the suffering of those who had died, so that the Grey Knights could reach this moment. The crew of the merciless transformed into monsters. The sacrifices made on 100 worlds to consecrate the weapons the Grey Knights carried. The billions who lived and died in ignorance of the war being fought in their name. Alaric thought about this as he stood over Herc's broken body. He thought about the cost of what they did, the terrible mathematics of salvation that demanded some suffer so that others might be spared. It was a dangerous thing to think about. Inquisitor Nixos, who oversaw the operation, had warned him of that. Such thoughts could erode a warrior's sense of duty, could introduce doubt where only certainty should exist. But someone had to think of them, Alaric believed. Someone had to remember that the Imperium they protected was made of people, not just abstract concepts. Someone had to watch over what they did, even as they watched over humanity. Otherwise, what were they? There is a cathedral on a world whose name matters less than its purpose. Within that cathedral, fires burn eternally in a lake that fills the floor, and clergy in shielded vestments walk upon brass walkways that glow red with heat. It is a place of sacrifice, of offerings made to powers that few understand. Upon the altar of that cathedral, men die so that weapons might be blessed. The ritual is ancient, dating back to an age when the nature of the threat facing humanity was first understood. The blood of innocent men, shed upon sacred ground, consecrates ammunition and blades for use against the daemon. It is not symbolism, it is not metaphor. The suffering of the sacrifice literally empowers the weapons that the Grey Knights carry into battle. This is the terrible economy of the Imperium's secret war. Lives spent like currency, purchasing another day's survival for a species that cannot be allowed to know the true nature of its enemies. On black ships that traverse the stars, psychers are gathered from 1,000 worlds. These are men and women touched by the warp, gifted with abilities that set them apart from normal humanity. Some will be trained to serve the Imperium, some will feed the Emperor's dying light on Terra, their souls consumed to power the Astronomicon that guides ships through the warp. And some will fuel the forges where Grey Knight armor is made. A psyker named Xanthi once sat in the darkness of a black ship's hold, surrounded by 100 others like her. They had been there for months, chained and forgotten, knowing only that punishment awaited them at their destination. The crew never spoke to them. The ship's wards blocked their powers, leaving them helpless and afraid. But Xanthi's power was greater than the ship's crew suspected. She had found a flaw in the wards, a tiny gap where condensation had eroded the sacred oils. Through that gap, she sent her mind wandering through the vessel, seeing what she should not see, learning what she should not know. She saw the cathedral where sacrifices were made. She saw the furnace where armor was forged, suspended above flames that burned with stolen souls. She saw a suit of massive armor on a rack, being prepared for a warrior who would never know whose suffering had made his protection possible. And she understood. They were going to be burned. All of them. The 100 psychers in that hold would be incinerated so that their power might be transferred into armor that would protect the very warriors who hunted their kind. Their deaths would fuel the war against the daemon, even though most of them had committed no crime beyond being born with abilities they had never asked for. When Xanthi returned to her body, the other prisoners looked at her with hope. They asked what she had seen, what fate awaited them. She could not tell them the truth. It would do no good. It would only add despair to their final days. "They are taking us to camps," she lied. "We will be studied by their scientists. It will be a hard life, but we will live." The old woman who led their prayers nodded and bowed her head. "Then let us place ourselves in the hand of fate. Even in this place, the Emperor is with us." Xanthi said nothing as the old woman let the flame die out. This too is part of the Grey Knights' war. The sacrifice is made in their name. The innocent burned so that the guilty might be destroyed. They do not ask for these deaths. Many of them do not even know the full cost of the weapons they carry, but the cost is paid nonetheless in screams and blood and souls consumed by flame. So what are we to make of these warriors, these sons of Titan who walk in darkness so that humanity might dwell in light? They are heroes, certainly. Their courage is beyond question, their dedication absolute. They face horrors that would drive ordinary men mad, and they do not flinch. They die in battles that will never be recorded, against enemies that most of humanity will never believe existed. But they are also instruments of a system that demands terrible prices. The secrecy they maintain requires the death of witnesses. The weapons they carry are forged in innocent blood. The war they fight perpetuates itself endlessly, victory always temporary, the darkness always pressing in. Perhaps this is simply the nature of the universe they inhabit. Perhaps there is no other way. Perhaps the suffering they cause is infinitely smaller than the suffering they prevent, and the mathematics of salvation, however cruel, still balances in humanity's favor. The Grey Knights themselves do not question. They cannot afford to. Doubt is a luxury that warriors on the edge of annihilation cannot indulge. They train, they fight, they die, and they trust that their masters in the halls of Titan understand the necessity of what they do. But in the quiet moments, in the candle-lit armories where they prepare for battles that may be their last, perhaps some of them wonder. Perhaps some of them, like Justicar Alaric, think about the cost of what they do and what it means to be both protector and executioner. Perhaps some of them remember that the Imperium they serve is not just an abstract concept, but billions upon billions of human lives, each one precious, each one deserving of protection not just from daemons, but from the very mechanisms that fight those daemons. These are not comfortable thoughts. These are not thoughts that lead to peace or contentment. But they are thoughts that remind the Grey Knights that they are still human, despite all the enhancements, despite all the training, despite the psychic powers that set them apart. They are the daemon hunters. They are the shield between humanity and nightmare. They are the price paid for survival in a universe of horrors. And in the end, perhaps that is enough. Let the candles burn in the halls of Titan. Let the names of the fallen be spoken in the darkness. Let the war continue, as it has for 10,000 years, as it will for 10,000 more. The Grey Knights endure. The Grey Knights remember. The Grey Knights fight on, until the end of all things. And in the spaces between the stars, where the light of hope flickers and dims, they stand alone against the darkness, always, forever, grey.